Hello. Today with us we have Tina Mary. Tina, uh, can you briefly tell about yourself? What are you doing for your job, for your living? What are you?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Sergey. It's so nice to be here and chat with you. I'm Tina Mary. Yes, I'm a Canadian, first of all. I live in British Columbia, in the southern interior of British Columbia. And I'm a consultant. I'm a cross-cultural consultant and inclusion consultant, but I specialize in the games industry, as you know. I worked over 15 years in games development as a game director, and I worked on AAA games with EA, and I worked with King Activision and so on. So I had a lot of fun. But today, my focus is more on helping build the soft skills and leadership skills that teams and individuals might need to be more effective working in such a diverse industry and such a challenging industry. So I really love what I do. I get to do public speaking, training, coaching, consulting, and a variety of things. And as an example, a project I just finished was assessing projects to see if they're ready to be funded to move into a production phase and to be supported through a fund. So lots of interesting and diverse work that I do.
Yeah,
Thank you again for asking me to join you.
yeah, sure. It's very important to understand what's going on the world as a whole. We have a lot of cultures in game industry, and there is like uh, five people in small team, and they have like six culture for themselves, and it's always it's not so easy to have a same ground to understand and to not offend anyone.
Yes.
What? Let's start with the basics of what is the cultural diversity. First of all, what's we
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah, that's great. Let's define that. So, cultural diversity to me, we tend to default to think about it maybe if, as you and I talk, a Russian and a Canadian, right? Or a male and a female, perhaps. It could also be different generations. You're from a different age group than myself. It could be functional roles. We have on the game teams, we had the engineers, the artists, the producers, the designers. So I think when we think about cultural diversity, the concept of culture and cultural diversity, culture can be defined as the way a group of people do things, the way they think, the way they behave, the way they talk, the rules that are acceptable and familiar to them. Should we jump straight into the meeting or should we have a little bit of small talk first? Right? We had that conversation at the very beginning today before we started recording.
Yes.
So I think that cultural diversity is a very broad context in when we think about it in game development, and that's the heart of my work. I work in the cultural intelligence space, and so I'm helping build the skills to work effectively across the different culture groups.
Excellent, excellent. Let's talk about common mistakes in such ground. It's such area. Uh, what mistakes can you remember, reminiscence, and how should we avoid them?
In game development,
Sure.
common mistakes, yeah, it's a really great question. If one of my roles in game development as a director was to guide teams to ask the smart questions, to track progress, to help them achieve great things and get the best out of themselves. And so when teams don't have clear milestones to track their progress, it's harder for them to make smart decisions. How much effort should we put on this feature? Should we cut it now and do this one? How do we build a great game? So I think that avoiding throwaway work, avoiding poor quality work requires that we have clear milestones and a way to measure the progress of what we're trying to achieve. So that's the most common mistake, not having clear milestones. Indie teams want to use agile processes. That's fine, but do it within a framework of understanding what you're trying to achieve and how you will know you're working in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
The next most common mistake is making assumptions, right? So, do you remember us talking about this word in English? If we look at the word assume,
Yeah. I remembered it for the whole of my life, and I always talk like I met a very wise woman, and she taught me such thing. Let's see, that's the word assume, us, you, and me. Remember, smart. Ah, wonderful, wonderful, and
That's
yes,
right.
because it's there's so many misunderstanding when you assume when the other part of the team think the same, that they understand the same goals or methods or
Exactly. Or
have the
vision or
same information or vision. Yes, sure, and it's always like when we start doing our game. For example, as me as a narrative designer, I always start uh, to have the same ideas in the same heads. So I'm just talking with people and trying to understand if they understand the
absolutely.
same ideas as I understand.
Yes.
Do I understand them, etc. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. We have to be there's a communication term called being low context. And when we talk about the way a team needs to work, a diverse team needs to work to avoid assumptions creating problems for us, we need to be very explicit about things. We need to describe exactly how things will be done, how we will measure progress, who needs what when, and what does success and complete mean, and so on. So yes, really great example. And another one is not tracking dependencies. So related to these assumptions is assuming that you're going to get your task done in time for my task so that they can go into the game together. So an example of this might be an artist reliant on a rendering technique from an engineer, or somebody in the gameplay team needing a pipeline complete so they can get the asset into the game so that they can test the play, the physics and the animation and so on. So when we have so many diverse talents coming together, again, it's complicated business, as we all know, building games. So I used to find a way to avoid this problem is just get a small group together if it's a feature, and get in a room and quickly map out, even for the next sprint, how are we dependent on each other, who's got what tasks coming in when. Because as you look at that board, all of a sudden you go, oh crap, that's not going to work, can you do this first?
Yeah,
But if we
yeah,
don't have those conversations, we make assumptions and we don't track our dependencies, and our schedule screws up.
yeah. It's
So, and the last most common mistake that I think we all know is underestimating the effort, right? So, um, when you're doing your estimates, ask yourself and your designers, how clear are we about this feature? We're 100% solid. It's the main menu. We know exactly what's going to be on it. Great. You probably don't need as much iteration. It's a brand new mode. Ooh, let's assume probably 100% iteration. Yeah, it'll take me 2 weeks to build what you've described. But by the time, then we're going to build it, we're going to look at it and go, oh, we got to fix it or change it, or, right? So put in enough iteration to build a great game.
it's interesting idea. So yes, it's the more new this mode or part of the game, the less information you have about the estimates, the less
Exactly.
it's less defined, and it's much more risks. Yeah, we
Yeah.
should
So you might modify, small, medium, large risk associated with how well we know this thing, and then we modify our estimates accordingly. It's just an idea. To me, when we think about, I'm talking about game development related, obviously, as you can hear, related to production, related to getting it done and getting a great game built. So I wasn't providing insights into game design mistakes, but game development mistakes.
Yeah, they told me that will be only fun, but there is a production. We need to get our release, and
Yes.
it's always a pain. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So we have some questions about diversity. Like
Sure.
our listeners, our viewers are very interested in this situation. And you are the best, the best person we can ask about this. So, is diversity is a trend, or is it here to stay as a industry standard?
Sure. Yeah. So we've defined diversity a bit already, right? We talked about cultural diversity. And so just to clarify for this conversation in the context of the game world, we're talking about diversity related to where we live in the world. Our gender is often what we talk about when we think about diversity in games, right? But it could also be, where do we live in the world? What's our ethnicity? What's our the generation we live in, and so on. But I think often when this question is being asked, it's about gender, right? And it's about, are we diverse enough? Because the reality is that the statistics show globally more than 50% of gamers are women. But the number of women in game dev is not even close. So does it matter? Does that matter? It should, right? Why should it matter? I think it should matter because you're serving an audience that you might not understand. If you don't have enough people on your team that can represent that perspective and help say, yeah, this makes sense for that audience, how will you know you're building games to resonate for that audience? So that's where diversity matters. I don't think it's a trend. I think diversity simply is. Diversity, like I said, exists even in your Russian team, as you know. Not everybody on your team thinks the same. You're from different age groups, different generations, different functional roles, different homes. You might have grown up in the same place as somebody else, and they're across the street from you. You're the same age group. You're both software engineers. The rules in his home and your home are very different because you have a different family culture. So diversity simply is in the world. It really just is. So it's not a trend. It's simply something we have to respect exists. And, and I think your next question is going to get into, what do we do about it?
I think we should learn and respect such thing. But what should we do with that?
Yeah, I mean, you were talking to me about this question, and one of your listeners had a question. If we go with diversity, how inclusive do we have to be, right?
Yeah.
How do we have to, can we go half measures? What does it mean to be inclusive? What does it mean to be diverse? And so an example you gave me when we chatted about this question was, is putting just one woman on my team enough? If I've got a team of 20 engineers and we hire one woman, is that enough, right?
Yeah.
And then once we've got that woman on the team, how welcome do we need to make her feel, right? So again, going back to definitions, diversity does not equal inclusion, right? And I want to make sure your audience understands when they listen to this. Diversity we've defined. Inclusion is about helping make diverse people feel like they're part of the party, that they belong there, that their voice counts, that they have an opportunity to do their best. So that's what we mean by being inclusive. So you might hire a woman on your team, but does she feel respected? Does she feel like her voice counts? Does she feel like she was a token hire, or that she was hired based on her skills that she brings to the team? Can we go half measures? No, I don't think so. I think when I say that, I think we have to be inclusive. To be effective, to be respectful of each other as individual humans, we have to be inclusive. And that includes being respectful of different cultures, Russian versus Canadian, or the artist's viewpoint versus the engineer's viewpoint, challenging our assumptions and being curious about each other's perspectives and including each other's voices. You can't go half measures with that. That's just too important, in my opinion.
Okay, let me understand let me check if I understand you correctly. Like the diversity is just just the foundation, it's the base. It cannot be a trend by itself. Yes, because we have different cultures in every group, and inclusivity in inclusion is all about relation. It's about attitude. It's about the power you can give the people with different culture, rather
Absolutely.
than.
Yeah, empowering. That's a great word, empowering them, right? Empowering others to do and be their best and be themselves, right? I mean, it's not that we're always going to be 100% showing up as ourselves at every moment. We adapt to the situation. I behave differently in church or at my grandmother's house than hanging out with my friends. That's cultural intelligence,
Yeah.
adapting. But the fact that I'm comfortable being able to adapt and feel okay about that and feel comfortable in those situations is inclusion.
It's very important understanding. It's a new thing for me, and it's wonderful. It's wise words. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, the next question I think we should ask. What important to not miss from the point of cultural intelligence perspective, but missed often.
Can you repeat the question again?
What important to not miss from the point of cultural intelligence perspective?
Oh, okay.
But
Well,
we often miss. Yeah.
yeah. So let's make sure I didn't define cultural intelligence fully for your audience. So I'd like
Yeah.
to take this opportunity now. Cultural intelligence is a form of intelligence that assesses our ability to work and relate to somebody different than ourselves. So, in other words, to be effective in a culturally diverse situation. So, for me to be effective as a leader with the FIFA Street team, I had to show up differently as a leader for my team, half the team in Russia, than the other half the team in Vancouver. You expected different leadership skills from me and a different approach to the project from me. And so that's me applying cultural intelligence to be more effective as a leader to meet your needs. How you saw, this is what I need from my leader for me to be effective, as an example. Cultural intelligence, or what the abbreviation for it is sometimes abbreviated as CQ. This is a trademark term a company uses it's an assessment tool that you can measure your cultural intelligence. And we measure four things. Your motivation is called CQ drive. Am I motivated to work across cultures? Do I enjoy working with people different than myself? And am I okay with dealing with the challenges? Am I persistent when things get awkward, when I make mistakes? Can I get past them? So that's all my motivation. The next capability is CQ knowledge. What we would think of as cultural awareness. Do I understand how Russian culture is different from Canadian culture? Do I understand how the different generations are motivated in the workplace and how that might affect me as a leader in the way I guide my different employees on my team and motivate them? So CQ knowledge also, for example, showed me that the team in Vancouver did better with individual tasks they could work on by themselves, but the team in Russia was far more effective working on group goals. And I could give them a game mode to work on together. They would achieve collectively and they would do amazing work, much more effective than if I handed them discrete tasks. So that was my cultural awareness that respected and understood that. Now, one of the most common mistakes that happen in cultural training is we stop there. We're motivated and we're aware. And we had this challenge even when we worked together. We knew there was a challenge and we talked about it, but we were always saying, so what do we do about it? What are we going to do about these challenges? So the answer is the next capability, cultural intelligence CQ strategy. I have a plan for my cultural interaction. I'm aware in the moment of getting all my voices heard. And I'm checking the assumptions. Not every person I meet from Russia is the same. Not every person who's from Gen X has the same motivations.
Yeah.
Then the last capability is our behavior. Can I adapt? So it could be as simple as speaking more slowly to an audience that has English as their second language and trying to make sure I'm avoiding colloquial terms and being more agnostic in my language, right? That's me applying cultural intelligence in a way in my verbal. How I give feedback. Should I give you straight feedback? That piece of code looks really bad. But for some engineers, that would crush their souls because all they hear is my work's bad. Another engineer would be, that's what I need to hear. This engineer might be, well, what did I do well? Tell me what I got to fix and remind me what I did well. So me adapting as a leader is adapting to how I give that feedback, knowing which one's going to be more effective.
There can be even one person who can say, uh, honest person, the first honest person I met in this shithole. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah,
You are my bro.
exactly. Yeah. So I had an engineer who used to give the engineering lead in Vancouver who used to give his feedback very direct. But when he did that with the team in Argentina, he was crushing their soul. And it took some time of coaching to talk and say, look, you need to spend a bit more time letting them know what they're doing well because they're assuming everything else is bad too. All they hear is they're bad.
No,
He's like, but I didn't tell them all their work's bad. I just told them that line of code's bad. But
yeah,
did you
yeah.
tell them the rest of the work's okay? They need to hear that.
Yeah, it's about context too. Yes, sure. It's like why should we talk about something that works fine? We should talk only about errors and
Exactly.
mistakes. No, no, it's a context. Yes, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Thanks for asking.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one of the question from my colleagues. Um, Many classical plots are morally obsolete now. Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice is drawn to sob, not to laugh. Anderson mermaid desire to sacrifice everything for the sake of the first guy does not look touching. And there are there ways to make such stories more understandable to modern viewers or players, and at the same time not to lose originality. Yes. Any good cases?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I'll be honest, it's a little more out of my sphere because I'm not as involved in game design and thinking about what games we're building. I'm more focused on how we do it. But I thought it was an interesting question. And from an individual consumer, I think it's culturally dependent. And I think we're going to touch on this later, but I would say if you have a great idea for a game and you think it should be based on a classical plot, but you want to kind of twist it a little bit for creative reasons, just test market it. Make sure you're talking to a diverse group of people and sanity check your ideas, right? Just because you could be fine in one culture group, but really challenged in another group. And I actually heard a really interesting example I can share. There's a woman named Kate Edwards. And Kate, if anybody's interested in culture related to the game design, go look up her work. She's fascinating. And she helps teams figure out, are your games going to offend people in different parts of the world, as an example. And one example she gave me was working on the early stages of, I think it was Age of Empires. And that's based on, in theory, history. And there was a war related to Korea and Japan in history that Korea had a different perspective as to the outcome of that war than what history tells us. And so if they were to be allowed to ship into that country, the Korean government said, you can't put this saying that we lost this war, we won this war. So then there was a decision by the development team. Do they sacrifice the authenticness of their game experience, which was supposed to be based on historical facts, in order to serve a diverse audience that believed a different set of facts? And so, as you might imagine, and I guessed, they changed the game for that market because they wanted to make the money.
Yeah,
and they respected the needs. So I hope that's a good example, but I think mostly it's about checking your audiences and checking your assumptions around what's okay related to the types of plots and game designs you want to pursue when they're touching on historical facts or historical works of art and so on.
Yeah, that's why I prefer fiction, because it's very hard to find the truth in history, because there was like 1,000 points of views, and all of they are biased by some political, religious, historical, social points of views, and it's so hard to understand what's going on, guys.
Yes.
Is there a truth? Like every part of the work can say that we are winners. Yeah, everyone is winners. Are you sure? Yeah, sure. Wonderful. Okay. So next question. is about Bechdel test. It's from my colleague. Again, she's a wonderful woman who always asks me like very important questions, and sometimes I feel like what is it? I do not understand you, but I am trying really, really. Like, what is Bechdel test? Yes, I checked. It's it is. The Bechdel test is great for checking your story for biases. Could you share a few more tools with us that can help us identify biases in our narratives?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So let's make sure the whole audience knows Bechdel. The Bechdel test is a very simple test that asks 3 questions of your game or your story. It has to have at least 2 named women in it. In other words, women who we know who they are. And the second thing is those women talk to each other. That's the second test. And the third test is that they talk to each other about something besides a man. A topic about something besides men. So I find this a fascinating test. I think it's a very interesting one to check bias related to tokenism when it comes to representing gender in games and movies and in other types of content and stories, right? So, is there just a throwaway woman in the plot, or do they really matter? Are they character in a position that matters? And so I think that's really what this test is trying to get to. So what other biases might exist? We could have ageism. We could have cultural biases of Russian versus Ukraine versus North American versus European versus Asian, right? We could have in terms of the story, we have to ask ourselves again, who are our audiences that we're serving, right? And is that an audience we understand? How well do we understand it? And if we don't, are we consulting with those who do? Are we seeking input from that audience effectively and actively and early on about our stories, about our narrative, right? There's a great tip I got given yesterday. I love this line. Go get feedback from somebody who doesn't love you.
Yeah.
Isn't that just, and that's the thing. So don't ask your best friend, don't ask your professor, don't ask your boss or your colleague. Go and find somebody who doesn't love you, who doesn't have a stake in the ground, and ask their opinion about it.
Let's proceed. Okay, so talking about Bechdel test, so we widen this test for every possible audience, like the people of old age. So we can put a couple of old women or old men, and try to name them, and check if they talk about non like middle-aged persons, and
Yeah,
it will works.
yeah. As an example, if we're talking with somebody who, if we're deciding to put an older couple in a game, but we're not an older couple, I'm not an old man or I'm not an old woman, perhaps I should consult with somebody from that generation to say, do you feel this represents your generation properly? So it's really about getting feedback from the culture group that you would like to represent. If you don't represent that, even if you represent that culture group, you should get feedback anyway. But if it's an identity that you don't represent and that you don't well understand, then you want to seek that feedback, right? To just say, am I representing you in a way that won't offend people?
Yeah, sure. It's there's two different questions. Like, should we ask the different persons to represent their group, their culture well, or and should we put some characters in the game to represent them in the game? So it's
That's a good point. So the second question is more about, again, diverse representation in the game, and that's a very personal question. I don't think there's any one answer here. again, I would go back to who are the audiences I'm serving, and am I representing that community? Probably. So if I have a community, if I'm serving a global community, should everybody in the game be a middle-aged white man?
Mm-hmm.
And does that represent a globally diverse community of players across the world? You know, all straight white men of middle age in the
Mm-hmm.
game? Or maybe should we see other sexual identities, other nationalities, other skin colors, other genders, you know? Um, but again, going back to, yeah, making it for a reason, not just
Yes.
deciding,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's an interesting question also. If you, for example, I'm doing the game for the young woman. Should I put some old granddad in this game? It's totally not my target audience, but could this character be interesting for my target audience? Should we avoid everyone who are not in my target audience? I don't think so. It can be he or she or
Of course.
anyone can be interested in the game, and that's the point. Not to fill your game with your target audience only characters.
Exactly. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So yes, let's talk about your job. One of your titles, "Woman in Games Ambassador," is interesting for our listeners. Now, there's been a glass ceiling in the men's world of game dev, where women has had convenient roles following other people decisions. Has there been progress there?
So I think I will be honest, I was almost upset by this question because I thought it implied, and it could be a translation issue. Women had convenient, a men's world of game dev where women had convenient roles implies to me that women are being hired just because they're women and not because they have the skills for the job. So I'm hoping I
No,
misunderstood
no,
that
no.
person's question. So just to clarify for our audience, and that's good to hear. So I think it's really about are we breaking the glass ceiling? Has there been a glass ceiling? Yeah. Women in Games Ambassador is a volunteer role that I have where I'm trying to advocate for gender diversity and inclusion in the games industry, and doing things like this conversation we're having, right? It's important. I think there's been progress. When I first started in the industry, the very first meeting I went to, I was the only woman of 30 people in the room.
Uh,
I did not feel my voice counted. I did not get asked for my name. It was a very strange situation and entry into the industry.
so
Yes, I
so
think
so
there's been
so
progress.
were like some exotic stuff like other than important person in this room.
I was a director in a group of people who were working on the PlayStation Portable launch title, and
Uh-huh.
we were there to meet and talk about that launch. So, because I was new to the company and new to the role, I was reluctant to ask questions, and I wasn't put in a place where I was comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt very noticeable as the only woman in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hard to not notice, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to not
Of course.
notice when you're the one of something. And remember that again with some of the other questions we'll talk about, right? So, um, you know, I think that there's been progress. I think we're making some strides. The industry's gender balance is getting better. Do I think we're where we need to go? No,
Mm-hmm.
not in the games that we're building and the diverse representation in the games, nor in diverse representation in the development teams themselves. We're not there yet. We're
Mm-hmm.
making progress. Yes, I would say baby steps, but we're getting there.
Okay. Okay. Small steps are better than no steps at all, but we should work on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Uh, what what are your thoughts on today's cancel culture?
Yeah. Cancel culture. Let's be sure that our audience is clear, at least what I define that term as.
You are
Is
very.
it,
I see you are the most accurate, the most polite person I interviewed yet. It's very very accurate. Let's check if we understand what we're talking about. No context at all. Only the strict definitions. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
We should be the same. We should move in your direction in our
Oh, thank you.
in our conversation style. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if we think about the term cancel culture, that's kind of what I'm trying to do, right? Is be more inclusive. I'm trying to check for understanding, challenge my assumptions. In the cancel culture, we're doing the opposite. We're shutting down opinions. We're shutting down the voice. We're shutting down a perspective, is how I understand and interpret cancel culture. It's about dismissing or diminishing a viewpoint or a perspective. And what are my thoughts about it? It's sad. It's polarizing. It's what I'm seeing in U.S. United States today with the elections going on, right? It's sad and awful. And I think this polarization of cultures is why the work I do is so rewarding, because cultural intelligence is about making the world better. It's about bridging gaps. And my experiences spent in Russia, my time living in Romania and Sweden and the United Kingdom, help me understand I'm a global citizen, and we need to be more respectful and understanding that we need to stop canceling each other out and canceling our voices. And sometimes we need to have the difficult conversations, and we need to be okay with them. So yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah, I think I can agree with you because we should build more bridges rather than walls. Of course, some walls is okay, like your personal walls or something like that. But it's not a good idea to broke everything to start the war from one cultural group to other, or from one culture to one person. It's not fair. It's not. It's a bad business. For example, it's not so ethical, maybe, and it's not effective.
Yeah.
It's not like we're trying to understand each other. Like my idea is that you are not obliged to love people you are not agree with, but you can try to respect him or she at least. Just
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Seek to understand, right? Just even that step alone is just so much better. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And the next question, it was this one question was divided to different for two different ones. Because it was in Russia culture, it's like the same question, but yes, of course, it's too different. What are your thoughts on forced diversity?
Yeah. So related to this question, I'm going to respond in the context of another related question you asked me, and that's: is it true companies do diversity hires without looking at hard skills, leading to tokenism, or is that just a rumor? So that question is what we mean by forced diversity. I think we're, now, of course, I want to go back. Do we mean forced diversity in the game design? We have to have a Black person, or we have to have a woman protagonist? Or do we mean forced diversity in our teams? It could be either or both, and I don't know what this person's question related to. The second question was, of course, related to the talent, the people on my team. So I think in the case of both, I think it's more common to see it in game design than it is in hiring. I mean, let's face it. Do you want to hire somebody on your team that doesn't have the skills to do the job? I mean, I don't believe it's happening. I think that there might be some pressure to lean towards, if you've got two people of equal talent and or experience, we should default to hiring another woman on the team. I think that absolutely is happening. But are they hiring somebody just because they're a woman and they don't have the skills? I don't believe that. I don't believe it for a moment. I really don't. On the other hand, is forced diversity happening in games?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, you're going to ask me a question about this too, right? Is there tokenism in related? Absolutely. Are we pandering? Sometimes, absolutely. I think so. I see it. I hear it.
Yeah, we are doing. Everyone is doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't believe that companies in general, even those who are trying to achieve specific targets related to diverse hiring, I don't believe that they are the majority of them are doing it what I would call the right way, the culturally intelligent way. They're increasing the applicant pool. They're making sure they're touching a diverse group of people so that they're actually getting those diverse applicants coming in to ask for those jobs. And they're creating culturally intelligent hiring practices to ensure they're removing as much cultural bias so that the right person is being hired based on the skills and the fit for the role and so on. But still, along the way, applying it in a way that helps bring in more diversity into the team. So I think that's the smart way to do it. And I think I've seen a lot of organizations take that approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Uh, Wonderful. An honest answer, and I like it. Uh, really, yeah.
Good.
Um, the next question is: can forced diversity in media alienate the misrepresented groups? Have there been cases where players hated a game for its misrepresentation?
Yeah. Um, Again, I don't spend a lot of time looking for these kinds of problems. This question was interesting. I know there was a good example for me of a company that made progress, and that was BioWare, EA. Star Wars Jedi. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they had a bit of a backlash because they had, I think, a black a character in the game that was really felt to be a token
Mm-hmm.
effect. There was no real, this person didn't belong in that universe from the fans' perspective. Um, what I saw is that they took that feedback to heart, and we can see them doing a much more effective job at diverse inclusion in Apex Legends. So I think if your audience is interested to understand examples of where a company maybe kind of got it wrong the first time, but then started moving in the right direction, those would be two games to investigate a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. It's the same idea of little steps, and
Yes.
we're trying our best. We are learning, and it's as a whole world we are trying to understand what's going on and what should we do to do our best. Wonderful, wonderful idea. I like it. Let's talk about China at least. At least
Okay.
it's my question really. Yeah, what's up with China? Like, um, or how is it even giants like Disney crash and burn in China? Why it's so hard to get in the China market? Uh, is it happens because very different culture from the Western, from the Europe or Americas, on even other Asia like Korea or Japan? Uh, or does it happen because of the political roadblocks? Why it's so different market? Why is so different culture? Why we are not even understand how to create some successful product in and sell it to China?
Yeah.
Even like Disney, big
Hmm.
huge company like,
Yeah.
with huge
Yes.
markets and good experts.
Still can't get it.
How it possible?
Yeah. It's cultural intelligence, to be
Yeah.
honest. It really is. Um,
Hello
if
Disney.
they're,
Hi me. I'm Tina. Yeah.
I think that you know, it's an interesting question. Do Russians like the same games as the French or as North Americans? Right?
It's
It's
possible.
different cultural things matter when we achieve
Different culture,
success.
but we play the same game in French and in the USA. It's
Perhaps, but I would tell you that in my experience being part of these juries and seeing the way that different cultural audiences resonate with games, you see culture show up in the elements of the games that appeal, the types of games that appeal. Some games are very culturally ambiguous. We can see something like Tetris or Asteroids that it's not going to really matter too much which culture group. But um, adapting to building. So here's the challenge I think that happens is teams want to take a game that's been successful in one part of the world and make minor changes to it and then ship it everywhere. And some games that will work, right? Some minor culturalization and local intercultural localization and intercultural considerations are going to be enough. But for some audiences, and China might be an audience where it's different enough, some of the games that are different, I mean, look at the games that are successful there. That's what and ask yourself, what's different from these games and the games that we're trying to ship there? You have to start with, and I would be including somebody who is Chinese, of course, on my team. You have to have Chinese designers and producers and community managers who understand your audience and how to reach your audience. You can build the right game, but if you don't know how to market it to that audience, you're not going to get it to them. And if you can get it to that audience, but you can't support them appropriately with your community management, then maybe that audience is not going to engage in the long run and you're not going to monetize. So in all cases, we need cultural intelligence. We need culturally relevant knowledge and information to be successful in any global market.
Yeah, in market we are trying to sell our product at least.
Yeah. And the political roadblocks, I think that's more impactful to the publishing and the actual getting it to market, excuse me, than the building the right game in the first place. So again, there's two different challenges we're facing in a new market, right? There's the business challenges of getting into that market, understanding how business is done, understanding how the laws work, intellectual property is protected, and so on. There's all these business aspects, and then there's, are we building the right game for that audience? So these are two different elements that might challenge us in our ability to be effective. So perhaps Disney had all the right business knowledge, but they didn't have the right game knowledge to build the right games and content for that audience.
Yeah, maybe. It's possible. Thank you for your answer. Yeah, we should learn about like World of Warcraft games that's very successful in China at all. Yes, and some other games are not. Yes.
And interview those players maybe. Why do you like that game? Why is World of Warcraft the game you want to play?
Why are you playing such game? It's a stupid game. No. I spent
what do you enjoy about it?
Yeah, I spent like 4 years playing World of Warcraft, and there was like a wonderful years. But I'm not from China, and I like this game too. Yes, we have something in common, at least. Yeah. The next question from our just from my work. We are trying to add polyamorous relationship in the game, and we are just think are we are not too far away from to diverse situation. Can it bring some problems like are we too progressive? Maybe maybe it's too far.
Sure.
Yes. How acceptable the mention of polyamorous relationship now?
Sure.
How
culturally sensitive, right?
Yeah.
How acceptable it is going to depend on your audience. Is this a game targeting a mature or adult audience? Because if you want this to be an E for everyone game, I would not include polyamorous relationships. But if it's at least T for teen or mature, then absolutely. I think that in most audiences and locations, it wouldn't be a problem. But again, if you were shipping this to some countries and parts of the world, absolutely you would not be successful if you include this dynamic in the game, right? Because some countries, that's just not done. But then again, you have to ask yourself as a development team, how much do we want to compromise ourselves and our ideas of what's a cool, interesting game? And this is an important part of our game design. It's not just a token aspect of diversity, but it's an important part of the game narrative or storyline or so on. So we really don't want to lose it. Similarly, if we see diversity in sexual identities, so should we see a trans person or a gay person in the game, and how are they represented and how acceptable is it? Again, in certain global markets, it's still quite unacceptable to portray those things in games and content, and so it might hinder effectiveness. But most teams are still not worried about that. They're doing the right thing and saying, no, this is what the world community looks like. This is who our players are, and so we're going to continue to represent the world in our games.
Yeah, it was not a token at all. We are trying to get some new narrative situation, some interesting situation, and it's the polyamorous relationship gave us a lot of possibilities. Like, wow, we have a new ideas. We have a new conflicts. It can be wonderful, but then we are trying to understand how the old woman, old Christian USA woman should react to that. Is it not too progressive for them? Is it can it give us some problems, some issues after? And as you can assume, business do not like risks. So like there's always two wolves. Like there is some part of art. I'm trying to create something new. I trying to get to the hearts of my players and create some emotions in them. And there is a business who are trying to not lose at all because of this art part. Yes.
Yeah. Check your market for sure. Like, and again, it goes back to testing your market and asking the people who are going to be playing your games what they think early on. Don't get too far down locked into that game design before you solicit external feedback on your ideas if you have any concerns at all.
Okay. Wise advice, as I
Thank you.
expected. Yes. It's yes. You're a wise woman. It's definitely boring. Okay. Thank you. So the one of the last question. What materials would you recommend as diversity and inclusion 101 for teams that are completely new to this idea?
Yeah. The very, very first, define it. Go back to, so those are two different terms. We talked about that at the beginning, but every team is going to have a different perspective on what diversity means to that team and where they are in their culture and their location in the world, their team makeup. So talk about what diversity means for it as a team. Talk about what inclusion looks like. Describe it for each other. Explore the concepts. There's a lot of materials out there that can support you online about, what we call psychological safety. Building a place where everybody can be safe on the team, feel like their voice counts, do their best. That's what inclusion means. So take the time to invest to learn about those concepts. And people there's so much materials out there to teach you how to apply that tangibly. What do I do differently on my team to be more safe, to create more voices being heard? For example, as simple as sending an agenda before a meeting ensures that the quieter team members who are more afraid of asking questions will have a chance to look at the agenda, think about it, and find a safer way to ask those questions. You will have a better meeting.
Yeah, fear atmosphere. Yeah.
And then the last thing is look at what other organizations and teams are doing. A lot of the game development companies, the larger organizations like Electronic Arts and Activision, they're trying to do some good things, right? And so let's look at what Epic Games is up to. Let's look at what Riot's up to. Let's look at the diversity and inclusion report coming out of Amazon Games. Understand what they're measuring, understanding where they're progressing. Much of it won't apply to a small indie team. But there will be some insights and perspectives that they can perhaps bring into their own starting place, their 101 toolkit.
Okay. Wonderful, wonderful ideas. Like my brains is melting with new information. I need to proceed it, and I hope everyone who are listening on or viewing this is have the same new neurons activated. Yeah. So last question. It was a wonderful hour, but we should go into the end of this. Um, few words of encouragement for our Padawans.
uh, my words of encouragement would be have fun. Don't stop having fun. I would say don't be afraid to ask for help. There's a lot of people in this industry that want to help you succeed. So people like Sergey, don't ask, don't get, right? So be okay with saying, hey, be clear with what you need, but be okay to ask for it. And have fun. Go back to that. Have fun. It's an interesting, dynamic industry. If you're not having fun, find something else that will make you fun. Life's too short not to do what we love.
Wonderful, wonderful
Thank you
words.
again.
I was not expecting such words, and thank you. It's important to understand that we're here to have fun, even in our work, even when we are trying to get a better world for us and our children and everyone else. Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
You are a very inspiring person, and I'm happy to meet you in my life, and it's wonderful.
Sergey, it's been an honor. Thank you again for the invite. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, and see you. Bye bye.